Maria had always dreamed of working at a big company. When she finally landed the job at a well-known corporate office, she felt excited and nervous all at once. She had worked hard to get there, and she was determined to prove herself. But on her very first day, things didn't go exactly as she expected. Her new manager, Mr. Johnson, was the kind of boss people often whispered about. He was tough, always demanding the best from his team. Maria heard from her coworkers that he could be difficult, but they said he respected hard work, so she was hopeful. She thought that if she kept her head down and worked hard, things would go smoothly. At first, the job seemed like a dream come true. Maria quickly proved she was capable, completing tasks faster than expected. She was eager to learn and always asked questions when she wasn't sure about something. Everything was going well, and she began to feel comfortable in her role. But soon, something happened that made her feel uneasy. Mr. Johnson started making comments that didn't sit right with her. At first, they were subtle, little jokes about how people from her background might not be familiar with certain types of work. Maria didn't want to make a fuss, so she laughed along, thinking it might just be an awkward attempt at humor. However, things quickly escalated. One afternoon, during a team meeting, Mr. Johnson made a remark that stung deeply. As the team discussed an upcoming project, Maria offered her ideas, hoping to contribute. She was used to speaking up in meetings, but when she finished explaining her point, Mr. Johnson's response left her speechless. "Well, I guess that's a good idea for someone like you," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I mean, it's impressive that you even understand how things work around here." The room went quiet for a moment, and Maria felt her face flush with embarrassment. She wasn't sure if anyone else noticed, but she could feel the sting of his words. It wasn't just the comment itself, but the way he said it, like he didn't believe she could truly understand the work because of her background. It was clear that it wasn't just a joke. It was something deeper, something racist. Maria's heart raced. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to stand up for herself, but at that moment, the room felt like it was closing in on her. Her colleagues shifted uncomfortably, but no one said a word. Maria's thoughts raced. Should she confront him? Should she report him to HR? But what if it backfired? She didn't want to be seen as a troublemaker on her first week. As the meeting went on, Maria tried to focus on the task at hand, but the words hung in the air. She could feel the weight of Mr. Johnson's insult. Was it just an offhand comment, or did he truly think that way about her? Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she was being judged, not by her skills or abilities, but because of the color of her skin. When the meeting ended, Maria walked back to her desk, trying to hold it together. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The more she thought about it, the more frustrated she became. She had worked hard to get to this point, and yet here she was, being reduced to nothing more than a stereotype in the eyes of her manager. She wanted to fight back, but she wasn't sure how. She didn't know if she was strong enough to take on someone so high up in the company, especially so early in her career. For the next few days, Maria couldn't shake off the comment Mr. Johnson had made. It echoed in her mind over and over. She tried to push it aside and focus on her work, but it was impossible. Every time she saw him, she remembered his words, and her stomach twisted with frustration. It wasn't just the insult. It was the way he made her feel so small, like she didn't belong. Maria spent hours thinking about what to do. She wasn't the type to back down from a challenge. But this felt different. The last thing she wanted was to make things worse for herself, especially in a new job. She wasn't sure if anyone else had noticed his comment, and she didn't want to risk becoming the target of more negativity. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the fact that what he had said was wrong. She decided to talk to one of her coworkers, a friendly woman named Sarah, who had been welcoming when Maria first joined the team. Maybe Sarah had experienced something similar, and talking about it would make her feel better. Sarah listened carefully as Maria explained what had happened during the meeting. She hesitated at first, unsure if she was overreacting, but as she spoke, the anger built up inside her. It wasn't just about the words anymore. It was about the principle. "I'm really sorry that happened, Maria," Sarah said after a moment of silence. "That's not okay. But you know, he's like this with everyone. Some people say he's just a bit old-fashioned, you know. He doesn't mean it in a bad way, I guess." Maria nodded, though she wasn't convinced. "Old-fashioned. That's a nice way of saying he's racist. I can't just let this go. It's not just one comment. It feels like this is who he is." Sarah seemed uncomfortable, unsure of what to say. "Maybe you should talk to HR about it, Maria. They'll take you seriously. You don't have to put up with it." But Maria hesitated. Could she really go to HR? Would they believe her? She thought about how easily Mr. Johnson could twist things and make it look like she was overreacting. It felt risky, but at the same time, she couldn't just stay quiet and let him continue to make her feel worthless. She had worked too hard to get this job, and she wasn't going to let one person destroy everything she had achieved. For the next couple of days, Maria tried her best to focus on her work. But the tension was palpable. Every time she interacted with Mr. Johnson, she found herself walking on eggshells. He was still acting the same, demanding, distant, and occasionally making those offhand comments that left her wondering if he even respected her as a person. One afternoon, Maria was sitting at her desk, trying to wrap up a project, when she overheard two of her colleagues talking near the break room. One of them was saying how impressed they were by Mr. Johnson's leadership, how he always pushed the team to do better. "He's such a strong figure in the company," one of them said. "A real success story." Maria couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. Strong. Success. She wanted to shout that he wasn't strong. He was just cruel. She had never felt so belittled in her life, and here they were, praising him like he was some kind of hero. Her anger was mixed with confusion. Why did no one see what she saw? Why did no one speak up? As the days passed, Maria's frustration grew. She couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. She knew something had to change, but she still didn't know how to make that happen. Should she keep her head down and endure it, or should she risk everything by speaking out? She was afraid of being labeled as trouble, of losing her job, and of facing even worse treatment from someone as powerful as Mr. Johnson. But deep down, Maria knew she couldn't just let this slide. The fear was real, but so was the feeling that she had to stand up for herself. She wasn't sure how or when, but she knew that one way or another, she couldn't keep working for someone who treated her like less than she was. The next morning, as Maria walked into the office, she was feeling the weight of her decision. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. Her anger was still bubbling under the surface, but she knew she needed to stay focused. She wasn't going to let Mr. Johnson's words define her or control her. As she sat down at her desk, she noticed a buzz in the office. People were whispering to each other, and there was a noticeable sense of excitement in the air. Maria was used to the usual office chatter, but today felt different. She tried to ignore it and get to work, but curiosity got the better of her. Finally, Sarah came over to her. "Maria, have you heard?" Sarah asked, her voice lowered. Maria looked up, shaking her head. "Heard what?" "Mr. Johnson," Sarah began, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. He's the CEO of the company. No one knew, not even the higher-ups. Apparently, he's been working undercover in our department for weeks to see how things are really run. He's been pretending to be just a manager." Maria's heart skipped a beat. CEO. The same man who had made her feel so small, so worthless, was the CEO. She couldn't believe it. It didn't make sense. How could someone with that kind of power treat his employees so terribly? How could he look down on them with such disdain? "I'm serious," Sarah continued. "It's all over the office now. He's the one who's been making decisions for the whole company. It's all part of some leadership strategy, I guess. He wanted to see how the real teams worked, without anyone knowing who he really was." Maria sat there in shock. The room felt like it was spinning. Her mind raced as she tried to process what Sarah had just said. The man who had humiliated her in front of the entire team, the one who thought she was less capable because of her race, was in charge of everything. How could someone like that be running a company? For a long moment, Maria didn't say anything. She just stared at her computer screen, her mind whirling with the new information. She had to admit, part of her was angry, not just with Mr. Johnson, but with herself. How had she not seen it? How had she let someone so powerful make her feel so small? But then, a different thought crossed her mind. If Mr. Johnson was the CEO, that meant he had the power to change things. If anyone could fix the toxic culture in the office, it was him. Maybe this wasn't just about confronting a rude manager. It was about something bigger. Maybe Maria could find a way to make him realize the impact of his behavior, not just on her, but on everyone who worked there. As she sat there, deep in thought, the realization hit her. She wasn't powerless. She didn't have to sit back and accept being treated poorly. Maybe it wasn't just about fighting for her own dignity. It was about changing things for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly in the office. She wasn't going to let his words define her. She was going to take control of the situation. And this time, she wasn't going to back down. Maria stood up from her desk, her mind made up. She was going to find a way to make her voice heard. She didn't know how, and she didn't know when, but she was no longer going to sit quietly in the corner, letting people like Mr. Johnson walk all over her. It was time for a change. Maria felt a surge of energy and determination as she sat back down at her desk. The news about Mr. Johnson being the CEO had shaken her, but it had also sparked something inside her. She wasn't just going to let this slide. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how deeply his actions affected not only her, but also everyone in the office. She glanced around at her colleagues. Some of them were still whispering about Mr. Johnson's true identity, while others were quietly working, unaware of what had just happened. Maria felt a mix of anger and frustration. How many people were being treated the same way she had been? How many were silently enduring his toxic behavior, too afraid to speak up? The idea of confronting him directly seemed impossible. He had all the power in the office, and if she challenged him, she could lose everything. But then, Maria reminded herself that staying quiet wouldn't fix anything. She had to be brave. She had to stand up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered in silence. She knew the first step was to gather her thoughts. She couldn't approach him without a clear plan. Maria had always been strategic, even in tough situations, and this was no different. She decided to write down everything that had happened. The insults, the way Mr. Johnson treated her, and the moments she had felt belittled. She made sure to keep the tone factual, focusing on his behavior, not his character. If she was going to take action, she needed to have evidence of the pattern, not just her feelings. After writing down her experiences, Maria thought about the best way to approach the situation. She could go to HR, but she wasn't sure if they would take her seriously. She had heard stories of other employees who had tried to speak up, only to be dismissed or ignored. But maybe this time, it would be different. Maybe Mr. Johnson's position as CEO would make HR more likely to listen. Maria wasn't sure, but she had to try. Before making any decisions, Maria decided to talk to Sarah again. She needed advice, and Sarah had always been a supportive friend. Sarah listened patiently as Maria explained her plan. "I think you should definitely go to HR, Maria," Sarah said after a long pause. "You've got the right to be treated with respect. And now that you know he's the CEO, it's even more important. This isn't just about you. It's about everyone who works here. You might be able to make a real difference." Maria nodded, her resolve growing stronger. "But what if he retaliates? What if he tries to make things worse for me?" "I won't lie to you," Sarah said gently. "It could happen. But if you keep the focus on the facts, his actions, not just your feelings, they'll have to take you seriously. And if nothing changes, at least you can say you tried." You'll know you didn't let him get away with it. Maria was quiet for a moment, thinking deeply. She knew Sarah was right. If she didn't speak up, nothing would change. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She wasn't going to let Mr. Johnson's power intimidate her any longer. As the day wore on, Maria's anxiety slowly turned into determination. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was going to take control of the situation. She would speak up. She would make sure her voice was heard, even if it meant facing uncomfortable consequences. By the time she left the office that evening, Maria had made up her mind. She was going to write a formal complaint to HR. She was going to confront Mr. Johnson's behavior head-on, and she was going to make sure she wasn't the only one suffering in silence. Her heart raced with both fear and excitement as she walked out of the building. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. She wasn't just standing up for herself anymore. She was standing up for anyone who had ever been mistreated, belittled, or ignored. Maria knew that the battle was far from over, but she was no longer backing down. The next morning, Maria arrived at work earlier than usual. She couldn't focus on her tasks, her mind still racing with thoughts of the letter she had written to HR the night before. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance she had to address the situation. If she didn't do it now, she knew she'd always regret it. She had made her decision, and there was no turning back. As she sat at her desk, her heart was pounding in her chest. Every sound around her seemed louder, the whispers in the office now feeling like a blur of background noise. Her eyes kept drifting toward Mr. Johnson's office, the door firmly shut as always. She didn't know if he had any idea what was coming, but she felt a sense of anticipation building inside her. Soon enough, Sarah came over. "Maria, you okay?" she asked, her voice low but concerned. "You seem a little tense." Maria nodded, trying to smile. "I'm fine, just thinking about HR. I sent the complaint. I just hope they take it seriously." Sarah gave her a supportive smile. "They will. You've got the facts, and you've got every right to say something. Don't worry, Maria. You're doing the right thing." Maria appreciated Sarah's reassurance, but her nerves didn't settle. She didn't know how Mr. Johnson would respond to the complaint. Would he deny everything? Would he try to cover it up, using his position as CEO to intimidate HR? The uncertainty was overwhelming, but she couldn't back out now. She had taken the first step, and now there was no turning back. The hours dragged on, and every minute felt like a lifetime. Maria kept her head down, trying to focus on her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She felt the weight of the situation pressing on her, but at the same time, she felt a strange sense of power. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been in her position, every employee who had been made to feel small or unimportant. Maria realized that her voice could make a difference. By mid-afternoon, Maria received an email from HR. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the subject line, "Follow up on your complaint." She quickly clicked on it, her hands trembling. The email was brief, just a request to meet with someone from HR in person the next day. Maria took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. This was it, the moment of truth. As the day came to a close, Maria was a mix of emotions, nervous, anxious, but also strangely hopeful. She had no idea what the meeting would bring, but she knew she had done everything she could. She had made the decision to stand up for herself and for everyone else who had been treated unfairly. That was all she could control. Walking out of the office that evening, Maria couldn't help but think about how far she had come. Just a few days ago, she had been terrified and unsure of what to do. Now she was facing down a situation that many people would have avoided. She had found her voice, and no matter what happened next, that was something she would carry with her forever. As she got into her car and drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about the next day. The meeting with HR, the confrontation with Mr. Johnson. Whatever happened, she was ready. She had taken a stand, and she wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. The next morning, Maria couldn't shake the nerves. As soon as she walked into the office, she felt like all eyes were on her. Everyone seemed to know about the complaint, though no one said anything. Maria tried to focus on her tasks, but her mind kept drifting back to the meeting with HR. She kept wondering what would happen next. Would Mr. Johnson find out? Would he try to silence her? Her phone buzzed just before lunchtime. It was an email from HR confirming her appointment for the meeting at 2 p.m. Her stomach flipped. The message was polite, professional, but she could feel the underlying weight of the moment. This was real. She was about to face the consequences of speaking up, and she didn't know what would happen. As 2 p.m. approached, Maria found herself pacing near the HR office. She was trying to calm herself down, but the tension in the air was thick. She kept reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong. She wasn't the one who needed to be afraid. Mr. Johnson was the one who had crossed the line, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. Finally, it was time. Maria knocked on the door of the HR office, her hand trembling as she turned the handle. She walked in and saw a woman sitting at a desk, typing away. She looked up and smiled. "Maria, thank you for coming in," the HR representative said warmly. "Please, have a seat." Maria sat down, trying to remain calm, but her heart was racing. The HR representative glanced at the paper in front of her, then back at Maria. "I've read your complaint, and I want to start by saying we take these kinds of matters very seriously." Maria nodded, her mouth dry. "I'm glad to hear that." The HR representative continued. "Now, I know this situation is difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions to understand everything fully." She paused for a moment. "Can you tell me more about what happened during your interaction with Mr. Johnson? What exactly was said?" Maria hesitated but then recounted the conversation. She told HR about how Mr. Johnson had belittled her in front of the team, how he had made crude remarks about her appearance, and the way she spoke. She explained how it had made her feel small, insignificant, and humiliated. Every word she spoke felt heavy, but she knew it was necessary. She had to tell the truth. After she finished, the HR representative took a moment to process the information. "Thank you for sharing that with us, Maria," she said gently. "I can tell this is very difficult for you. We're going to take it from here and investigate the matter thoroughly. I'll keep you updated on what happens next, and we'll make sure to protect your identity during this process." Maria felt a small sense of relief. At least now she knew that HR was taking her seriously. But she also knew that the hardest part wasn't over. She wasn't sure what would happen once the investigation was over. Would Mr. Johnson be punished? Would things go back to normal, or would he retaliate against her? She didn't know, but she had made the choice to speak out, and that was something no one could take away from her. As the meeting ended, the HR representative shook her hand. "We'll be in touch soon, Maria. Thank you again for your courage." Maria walked out of the office feeling lighter, but still uneasy. She had done what she could. Now, all she could do was wait. As she returned to her desk, she couldn't help but think about how much had changed in just a few days. She had gone from feeling helpless and scared to taking action and standing up for herself. No matter what happened next, Maria knew she had made a difference. She had found her voice, and it felt more powerful than anything she had ever known. The next few days dragged on as Maria waited for news. The uncertainty was almost unbearable. She went to work every day, keeping her head down, doing her tasks, but her thoughts were always elsewhere. Her phone was never far from her hand, always checking for updates from HR. Nothing came. The silence was deafening. Mr. Johnson continued to act as if nothing had changed, walking around the office with his usual arrogance. He never once acknowledged what had happened, nor did he seem concerned about the complaint that had been filed against him. This made Maria uneasy. Was he confident that nothing would happen? Did he think he could just brush it off? But Maria wasn't about to let herself be intimidated. She had already done what was necessary, and now it was time to let HR do its job. She couldn't control what happened next, but she could hold on to the courage she had found when she decided to speak out. Then, just as Maria was starting to wonder if the complaint had been forgotten, she received an unexpected call. It was from HR. Her heart raced as she answered, her voice shaking. "Maria, this is Linda from HR," the voice on the other end said. "I just wanted to update you on the investigation. We've completed our review and have taken the necessary steps. We've spoken to Mr. Johnson, and he has been informed of the consequences of his actions." Maria's breath caught in her throat. What does that mean? What happened to him? Linda paused before responding. "I can't go into full details due to privacy reasons, but I can tell you that Mr. Johnson has been removed from his position as manager. We've also made it clear that any form of discrimination or harassment will not be tolerated in this company. He's been given a final warning, and we are monitoring the situation closely." Maria could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had expected some sort of punishment, but she didn't think it would go this far. Mr. Johnson, the man who had humiliated her, had lost his position. It was a huge step, but it didn't feel like the victory she thought it would. Instead, it felt like a weight being lifted off her shoulders. She had helped create change, not just for herself, but for everyone who worked at the company. "Thank you, Linda," Maria said, her voice steady now. "I appreciate everything you've done." Linda's tone softened. "Maria, I want you to know that this situation isn't just about Mr. Johnson. It's about creating a safe and respectful environment for everyone. Your bravery in coming forward has helped set an important precedent. You've made a difference." Maria hung up the phone feeling a sense of relief, but also a new understanding. She had started this journey feeling small and powerless. Now she realized she had found strength within herself. By standing up for what was right, she had not only fought for herself, but also for others who might have been too scared to speak out. Her actions had changed something in her workplace, and that was something to be proud of. The following week, things in the office felt different. The atmosphere had shifted. People were more respectful, more aware of the need for inclusion. Maria noticed it in the way her colleagues interacted with each other. There was a new sense of unity. Though it wasn't perfect, it was a step in the right direction, and Maria knew she had been a part of that change. As she left the office that day, Maria couldn't help but smile. She had faced her fears and had come out stronger. She had proven to herself that standing up for what's right wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Maria had learned that her voice mattered, and that sometimes one person's courage could spark the change the world needed.